You're a startup founder. You think your product is amazing and feel like more people should be buying. But the road is long and slow. It feels like you're stuck. There's always one thing I ask startup founders. Have you talked to your customers? They almost always say, heck yes, we talk to our customers all the time. But what I find is they're either selling or trying to improve their product. These are not customer-focused conversations. If we can get curious about our customers, then we can uncover critical insights that will help us build to the next round. I'm Anna Firmenov, and welcome to Building with Buyers, a show about startup growth where I'll explore how customers help startups build to the next round. All right, Christopher Lochhead, you're an all-star on the show. This is the fourth time. I can't believe that. You keep coming back. I appreciate you so much. Christopher Lochhead is 3-time Silicon Valley public company CMO. He makes a lot of content. I'm sure the listener listening to my show has heard of you, Christopher, because you're creating podcasts and books and newsletters for entrepreneurs and marketers with a different mind. And that really resonates with me. I am always trying to just get away from the pack, right? Like that's part of how I am. And if that's part of how another person is, I connect with that. That really resonates with me, with a different mind, because we're just told in society, we're told to think a certain way. We're told to look a certain way. We're told to work a certain way. We're told, right? We just are told that. And then people that want to kind of pull themselves out of the system, I admire that. I think that's a big reason why I became an entrepreneur, because I want to create the system versus just be sucked into whatever exists out there. So with a different mind, the newsletter is called Category Pirates. And you've written books like Play Bigger, Niche Down. You've gotten kicked off LinkedIn multiple times. Are you on LinkedIn now? Are they allowing you to speak on there?
I am, and I'm not quite sure what's going on. I think, and actually it's very germane to the topic of your podcast, Anna. I think there's only one reason I'm still on LinkedIn. I've been deplatformed at least half a dozen times by them, maybe more, because it turns out that LinkedIn hates free speech and they don't like it when, in my case, you stand up to radical terror and Jew hate. And as we were talking about just before you hit start here, ideological racism, that is to say the hate of other people who have different political or social beliefs from you, is now the largest and fastest growing form of hate in our world. And I don't stand for any of it. I don't mind if people disagree with me. That's fine. Sometimes I disagree with myself. And many of the people I love the most in the world don't agree with me on certain really key important topics. And that's okay. Steel sharpens steel. We used to live in a world where authentic dialogue mattered, where the push and the pull mattered, where steel sharpens steel mattered. I want my Republicans and right-leaning folks advocating for freedom and free markets and entrepreneurship and less tax and strong military and law enforcement, et cetera. And I want my more liberal-leaning, Democrat-leaning folks advocating for equal rights and for justice for all and for workers' rights and for building a social safety net and leading with empathy. And we could go on about the sort of differences, but the push and the pull of that is incredibly healthy. And as I explain to people all the time, we don't want to live in a world that is 100% run by the left or 100% run by the right. That's a bad world. All we have to do is look at what's happened in California. And for the better part of 30 years, it's been one-party rule. And while there are many things that work in California, and there's lots of positives to point to, that's important to underscore, here in California, we are a failed state on many measures, and in large part because of one-party rule. It used to be called debate. It used to be called dialogue. It used to be called civil discourse. And today it's hate. And I'm disgusted by that. And it turns out that our friends at LinkedIn don't like it when you're vocal about those things. And so they deplatform me. And to the point about your new podcast or your new focus, the only reason I believe, I don't know for sure, it's the only thing that makes any sense that I have been replatformed so many times is a combination of A, I've made it very clear to LinkedIn, and I have done this to them, body slam them in public for why they deplatform me. And that's very hurtful to them, as it should be. Because when you do things that are immoral, you should get punished for it. And the real reason, and the only reason I have any clout of any kind, is because of customers, people who get value from the work that we do. And so every time they deplatform me, there are countless folks who protest on their platform and say, this is fucking bullshit. And sometimes I'm off for 3 days and sometimes I'm off for a week. But so far, they've let me back on. And so I'm going to keep being me. I assume I will be deplatformed forever at some point. That said, it's very clear the mood in the United States is changing and tilting more towards authentic free speech. So we'll see. But if somebody wants to say something hateful or evil or promote terrorism or intolerance, they're going to hear from me.
And I love that. I appreciate it. I love it because it just hits in a different way when it's coming from someone that's not Jewish, like it just hits in a different way. So I appreciate you so much for that. And I'm glad that you're back on. And I hope that you're never deplatformed forever and I totally agree with you. Like, I think the reason that they keep bringing you back is because people love you. Like
There's clearly others who don't.
Right. There's either people that super love you or people that super hate you, but that's the point, right? Your point is not to be lukewarm where people don't care. That's the worst.
And I'm not putting it on either. Like some people sort of put this on. It's kind of who I am. I was born a fighter and I'll always be a fighter. I want to share with you a quick story if I could. Last night I was flying home and I got to the airport and we were clearing security. And there was a man who appeared to be about my age, maybe a little bit younger, with what appeared to be his son. And around his neck was the Bring Them Home Now dog tag necklace, of which I have. And when I'm doing a public appearance, and I have ever since October 7th, and sitting next to that was a Star of David on his chest, out. And I saw him, and I came through security before him. And I said to my wife, Carrie, I said, just give me a sec. I want to hold back and see if I can have a word with this man. And as he was coming towards me, I tried to put on my best smile, not threatening face and say, excuse me, sir, I couldn't help but notice your necklaces. And I just wanted to say, I stand with you and God bless you. And then a conversation ensued. And during that conversation, I took out this necklace and I told him, my grandfather, Jack, served in World War II.
The necklace is a cross. Sorry, I'm
cross,
just, yeah.
that I wear all the time. And I said, my grandfather, Jack, served in World War II. And since I was a very little boy, I've known about the Nazis. And I said, the other thing that you should know, my entire life, I've had Jewish family and friends. I have half Jewish nieces and nephews. And I, of course, served as a head of marketing for one of the most successful Israeli software startups of all time, a company called Mercury Interactive, and worked with 4,000 people at that company, roughly half of whom were Jews and Israelis. So we had a very nice exchange, and I told him that I loved him and would always stand with him. And we had a great hug and shared a few stories. Whether it's in the native digital world or in the analog world, it's very important. There's one other thing about this I'd like to say, because a lot of people have a hard time with nuance and understanding. In the last 2 years, two of the most impressive, inspiring entrepreneurs I've worked with and put my own money into their businesses are Muslims. And I have many Muslim friends, legendary people who live either in Muslim countries and, of course, here in the United States. And so this is not a religious war. This is not about ideology. This is not about land. This is about good and evil.
Yeah. This is about terrorism. And that's where I think people, I don't know, forget, ignore, misunderstand.
Yes, exactly. And look, I'm not saying everything that the Israeli state has ever done is perfect. Far from it. There's been many mistakes made. There's been many mistakes made by the United States. We did not have to drop those nuclear bombs. That was disgusting and immoral, horrible, and the history of slavery and many other things you could point to in the United States. And you have to look at the overall picture. What has been the contribution of the United States of America? What has been the contribution of the Israeli and Jewish people? And what kind of people are they like today? When you do business with them, when you go for beers with them, or a nice Italian meal and some Brunello. And when you sit down with an incredibly inspiring 27-year-old Muslim entrepreneur from Pakistan who fought really hard to come to Silicon Valley and build incredible forward-leaning tech, that's inspiring. And when you're as privileged as I am to have had the opportunity to work with Israeli founders for the bulk of my career, and I'm invested in many right now. One of the most exciting AI companies I know of, SafeBooks, started by a legendary Israeli team and a man, Ahikam Kaufman, that I have known for 25 years. Yeah. And so this is about humanity. This is about people. This is about good people versus bad people.
Agreed. I didn't know we were going to go into this tangent, but I should have known because because that's what happens. And this is important stuff. And I appreciate you bringing this up right in the very beginning of our conversation. I want to make sure that the listener can go back to episodes that I've had with you before because they are very good. In fact, episode 44 was the first one we did together. And that one is still in my top 5 most listened to episodes. It's called Why 98% of Startups and Marketers Waste Their Time. Absolutely need to listen to that one. We've got episode 108, Why Most Content is 100% Content Free and How Non-Obvious Ideas Help. And also episode 136, Why Treating Your Creative Marketing Like It's Not Tied to Revenue Will Get You More Revenue. So I think there are really nice gold nuggets in all 3 of these. But if you haven't heard the other ones, start with episode 44. So today, that was a lot that we just discussed, Christopher. I feel like we're rolling into something that's like probably a little bit less emotionally charged, but let's see. Let's see where this goes. So I'm exploring how customers help startups build to the next round. Obviously, revenue. You need customers, you get revenue, that's a given. But beyond that, the work that I do, for example, customer research and insights that informs business strategy, which was a huge thing in B2C, which I come from, but for whatever reason is not a huge thing in B2B, is what I've found. Kind of gets knocked to the side, and there's a lot of assumptions and opinions and testing our way into positioning and messaging, which I don't agree with, obviously. So there's that part. There's surprising and delighting customers so that they'll spread word of mouth referrals, right? There's customer events where you're learning from your customers on how they use your product. There's customer marketing, there's user generated content. There's a whole slew of things on how customers help startups build to the next round. One big problem I find with startups is that they say they talk to their customers all the time, but they really don't do it with intention or a goal. They don't do it systematically. It's just maybe the founder, it's all in the founder's head. They don't use what they talk to customers about. And so as a company grows, the focus moves further away from customers and more towards the product and building the product and sales conversations. And so you're like, I did this work, right? As a founder, you're like, I feel like I've gotten plenty of customer signal already. So I don't need to do these customer conversations, which is a mistake. because I believe the most successful startups are obsessed with their customers. And I'm curious, Christopher, what's your take on this? Like, are customers the most important? And I know you talk a lot about super consumers, so I know there's like some alignment there, but I'm curious what you think.
So yes, of course, grow an IQ. Yes. And the simple question is, what, why, and who are you building your startup for? And most people, whether they realize it or not, the mental scaffolding they use, we're building it for us. And look, I understand that. Us is very important. Human beings are wired to survive, right? And as George W. Bush so famously said, it can be hard to put food on the family. And so putting food on the family really matters. And you're talking to a 10-year-old paper boy who was raised by a single mother in an environment of real struggle, who never had anything. And I got thrown out of school at 18. I failed out. And with no other choice other than manual labor work, I started a company. And so I understand the wanting to improve your station in the world and wanting to build a great company and the love of great products and the love of great tech. I love it as much as anybody. And we get to a certain point in life where we realize the thing that matters most is making a difference for others. Human beings need each other. As a matter of fact, we need each other so radically and dramatically. The largest form of punishment we give to a human being who commits the most horrible atrocities is we lock them in a room by themselves. That's how radically we need each other. So yes, if we're not building our company for our customers, then what are we doing? And there are some companies that are grounded in a true north, and that's what they're governed by. And there are other companies that are run by assholes with spreadsheets. And listen, there are assholes with spreadsheets who make plenty of money, but you have to ask yourself, for whom are you doing this? So that's where I'd start. Yes, of course.
That's what I thought you would say, because you talk heavily about super consumers and they're in your books, and you talk on your podcast about how important it is to know who they are and why they chose you and what you're building for them and why they went with you specifically. So I thought so, but do you also run into this? Like, there are companies that say that the customers are at the core of everything they do. And it's not true, because I run into this all the time.
Look, it's marketing bullshit most of the time, and we all know it. And you see it now, and I hope they don't go too far afield here, but a company that, those of us in the United States most likely know, which is Southwest Airlines. And Herb Kelleher was one of the greatest innovators, entrepreneurs, and category designers of all time, and one of the great characters, smoking, drinking wild turkey, outrageous, over the top, incredibly creative, giant-hearted, and deeply focused on this issue. And their point of view that built the company is everybody should be able to enjoy the power, the amazing fucking gift of airline flight. And their tagline for years was, "You are now free to move about the country." And they said, we're not going to nickel and dime our customers and do a bunch of dumb shit. And Herb's been dead for many years now, several years, unfortunately. His passing was a tragedy. And you see the company now starting to drift from that true north. And if the assholes with spreadsheets outnumber the people who are focused on radical true north, then you're going to end up with United Airlines. And as we know, United Airlines and Comcast are in a death battle to see who can be the shittiest fucking anti-customer company in the country. And so that's a tragedy. And I hope it doesn't happen. But that happens in a lot of places. The opposite is also true. It's one of the reasons, Anna, I love small-y entrepreneurs. I've spent the bulk of my professional life working with some of the greatest entrepreneurs backed by the greatest venture capitalists in Silicon Valley history, building multi-billion-dollar category designing, category dominating companies. And I love that work. And I love small-y entrepreneurs. And one of the reasons I love them is the level of give a fuck is so high. My favorite restaurant here in my hometown is run by two Italian guys and one of their American wives. And the minute you walk in the door, the first time you walk into this restaurant, they love the shit out of you. The food happens to be absolutely world-class, incredible, Northern Italian, awesome, legendary food, my favorite kind of food. And the level of give a fuck is incredibly high. And they do all the little extra special things. And they do all the little things that on the surface, from an ROI perspective, look absolutely insane. Well, you could chintz out on that, and we don't have to make our own this. We could, and nobody would notice, and so forth and so on. All those small decisions. And they make all those small decisions on the side of legendary, on the side of serving the customer. And the first time I went in there, they have sort of this outdoor section that's kind of used to be inside, but then they created an outdoor side. I think it might have happened during COVID. I'm not positive. Anyway, the first time we went there, it was a cold and rainy night. And we got there and we weren't seated in the main restaurant. We were seated in this kind of add-on section. And it was cold and it didn't feel great in there. And my wife was getting cold. And it was like, we can't stay here for this. We're going to leave. And one of the servers in the restaurant, not one of the owners, saw this happening. And we were being served by a newer, younger person who maybe didn't have experience with customers who were not happy. And we weren't being assholes, or certainly not trying to be assholes about it, but we don't want to sit there in the cold, and we don't want to wear puffer jackets at dinner and so forth. And so we were going to get up and leave. And this more experienced server, giant-hearted woman named Georgia, came over and said, "Oh, I see. What's the issue?" And we explained to her. She said, "No problem. We're going to find something for you. And why don't we do the following?" She brought us out of that area into kind of the more reception area where there was a seating area before you go to enter the restaurant proper. And she says, "Can we bring you a nice glass of Italian wine and maybe some snacks? Give us a few moments and we'll get you set up." And that's what they did. And one of the owners came out and delivered those yummy appetizer snacks and a nice glass of Brunello and introduced himself. His name's Matteo. From that moment on, a love affair ensued. And large corporations can do this too. Software companies can do this too. I mentioned Mercury. One of the reasons for Mercury's success, Anna, was the culture that was built around customers from the very beginning. And with a company like this that was duly headquartered in Tel Aviv and Silicon Valley, with most of engineering, particularly in the beginning, being in Tel Aviv, creating customer intimacy was a little bit more challenging because in many cases, you're many thousands of miles away from the customer. And one of the founders of Mercury, very early on, said the following: "If you're the engineer that wrote the code that fucked up the customer, you will fix it. And if you have to, you're getting on a plane and you are not coming home until the customer is elated, period."
Did you see this play out before?
Oh, yes, many times. Now, of course, as we grew, that gets a little bit harder to do, take engineers and put them in the field. However, that said, Anna, Mercury's engineering team, not product marketing and management, although they were great too, the actual engineers, and I know this because this is a bit of a side note, but in many software companies, of course, marketing is hated by engineering and by sales and vice versa. And so there was a handful of things we did to break all those insane, stupid, moronic mental scaffolding and barriers. And one of them was twice a year, the head of engineering and I, Boaz Hamlish, would swap jobs for a week. And he would fly to California and take my job. And I would fly to Tel Aviv and take his job. And over time, not only, of course, did the marketing and engineering teams know this was happening, the whole company knew, A, that it was happening and when it was happening.
Because everything would be screwed up.
Yeah, exactly. Because they let Lochhead talk to the engineers and all the schedules blew to smithereens.
That's amazing. I've never heard of this before, but I think this ties back to having empathy for your customer, but also having empathy for your coworkers. And the more you understand and empathize, the less likely that you're going to be fighting against each other. So,
and then as we grew over time, for example, we would put frontline coders, we'd bring them as a reward to our user conference and have them lead with the product managers. Our head of support, Patrick Sager, was unbelievable at making these connections happen. So when things had to escalate outside the normal support structure, they could, and they could escalate quickly, and the right people could get involved. And we would fly engineers and engineering leaders out to Yankee games to do the schmooze and booze with customers in Manhattan or Cleveland or wherever. And so engineering was deeply involved with customers, as of course were sales. And in terms of marketing, most people have a hard time believing this. But as the head of marketing for a 4,000 person rough and tough, publicly traded multi-billion-dollar corporation, I was in the field 40, 50% of the time. I was not at corporate. I was on a fucking plane. I did 200,000 to 400,000 miles a year for the better part of 20 years.
What were you doing? You were flying to the customer?
Yes. Meeting with customers, meeting with prospects, helping to close deals, meeting with local government officials, doing PR, doing investor events, you name it. I spent a ton of time with our investors. I always spoke at every single one of our investor days. I did one-on-one sessions with investors like I would with customers. I had a lot of windshield time with reps, Late nights, closing deals with the Mexican IRS at 11 o'clock at night at the end of the quarter. And then all of us going out to celebrate with tequila afterwards.
Yeah.
After a long day of back and forth that was not always fun.
So the difference, I think, between you and what you were doing and other marketing leaders at other tech companies is oftentimes they are not so integrated into the sales process. And actually, nobody really knows if marketing is contributing to revenue, which is still a problem to this day. Like, well, why did you hire these people? Everybody at the company should be contributing to revenue. So that's the difference, I think, with you being so well integrated into meeting with the customers and
I'm an entrepreneur. I grew up poor. See,
yeah.
It's real simple. When you leave to go to the office and your wife says, don't come home without the deal, because if you don't, we can't pay the fucking rent. It's very focusing. And in terms of this issue for marketing leaders, my advice is this. If you're the head of marketing of any kind of company, but certainly a startup tech company, one of your primary goals is to be the number one most requested person in your company on a sales call. Because I will tell you this, if the head of marketing is not highly valued by the people who do, and I say this with tremendous love and respect for engineering, but sales is the hardest job there is. Having a conversation with somebody who then gives you $10 million for a bunch of zeros and ones is an insanely hard thing to get done. And if those people do not value you, do not believe that putting the head of marketing in front of a prospect, in front of a set of customers who come for a corporate visit, at a user conference, at a customer schmooze and booze in Boston, or whatever the scenario is, if they don't believe that you as the head of marketing are the most valuable, or certainly one of the top most valuable executives in the company in front of prospects and customers, you're a donkey. That is the objective. And I would tell salespeople all the time, you put me in front of one of our prospects or customers, and by the time I'm done, they will have physical pain in their body regarding their need to buy our software now.
That can only happen if you truly empathize with and understand who this person is, what their goals and challenges are at work, how that fits into what you're building for them. So that all ties back into customer research and insights that helps inform business strategy.
I would agree with all that. And then I'd also take it, Hannah, to the very, very simple. So there's a lot we should talk about: weird data and category data science. My partner, Eddie Yoon, is literally the godfather of category science focused on customers, Superconsumers. So we should talk about that. And he's taught me much. And I would bring it right down to brass tacks. Most people, certainly executives and visionary founders, do not listen.
2.
Anything.
Like
what most people call listening is actually called waiting to talk.
Agreed. And this is a huge problem, right? Because if you're not listening and you're talking to people and trying to learn from what they have to say, then that's a waste of time. You might as well not be there. So when you say most people
we
don't
already
listen,
know what we think.
Yeah.
Now, by the way, I was not gifted with this, the gift of natural ability to focus on the other and listen. And as a younger man, I suffered from horrible, horrible incidents of verbal diarrhea that got me in much trouble. And so I had to learn, and I had to have friends and family smack me in the head many times. And I ultimately taught myself a trick because I realized this is one of the biggest limiting things in my life. I'm an outward person. I'm gregarious. As you can probably tell, I tend to be much more extroverted than introverted, not always, but anyway. And so I taught myself a little technique, which is when somebody else is listening, I do it to this day. I literally bite my tongue to remind myself to shut the fuck up. And so when you're talking, I will naturally do this. I don't clamp down on my tongue, but I just kind of do that.
Not too painful, right? Just a little bit.
Just a little reminder. And I would recommend for folks, don't do it with your mouth open because it kind of looks weird if you're sitting going,
Yeah.
right? So just a little bite, gentle, with your mouth shut, hopefully with at least a smile or a semi-smile. And then the other thing that's interesting, when you actually shut the noise up in your head for a second and listen, what's Anna saying? And my focus is on you. You're coming from a place of curiosity, a place of interest. And you said one of the magic words, Anna, learning.
Tell me more about the superconsumer data science, because that's really what I focus on. Is whenever I start a client engagement, I ask them to give me their best customers, their target buyer, and I need to talk to them before I do anything else. And I interview them, and I have this set of questions. And what I found, actually, Christopher, is interesting is that most B2B startups talk about, like, we do that too. It's jobs to be done. Have you heard of jobs to be done? The co-founder of Jobs to be Done, Bob Mesta, was on the podcast, and I got to ask him all sorts of questions. But what I realized was the jobs to be done questions are very specific. Like, the point is you want to understand, like, what job are you trying to get done with this product, and like the journey, right? How did you get to exploring our product? What was the trigger that made you want to actually purchase it? What are you able to do now? Which is all important. But my interview questions go beyond that. And it's like whole person customer research. So because I work with a lot of ed tech startups, they talk about child a whole child approach to education. It's not just the academic side. It's also the social, the communication, and the emotional stuff, and the behavioral stuff. And there's like a whole child approach to raising a good human being. And so the same thing is with my approach, which I realized only after talking to folks more about customer research and jobs to be done and getting Bob on the show. I'm like, wait, actually, I go beyond that. I do whole person customer research, which is fascinating because I've been doing that forever. And I wasn't sure, like, where did I get this from? Because it's got some jobs to be done in it, but it's more than that. It's really a lot more than that. It's like asking the person, being curious, right? And asking questions, but then also digging deeper, which doesn't always happen in these interviews because people are like, great, the value of our product is that it's easy. Check the box there. The value of our product is that it gets them ROI. Check the box there. Let's move on, right? And so everybody starts to sound the same because they're like only digging so deep with these customer conversations. So That was an aha moment for me actually this year of the way that I do this research is different from the way the other people are doing this research.
Yeah, so I want to back into the category data science because it turns out that the category design approach pioneered by the legendary Eddie Ewan, who's written more on category than any person alive or dead for Harvard Business Review. So I want to get to that in a second, but I want to start with an illustrative story. It's one of my favorite stories about exactly this. So one of the greatest and most innovative technology companies of all time, in my opinion, is a company called Marshall Amplification. And but for Marshall amps, there'd be no rock as we understand it today, rock music. So there's this guy named Jim Marshall in the early 60s, and he owns a music store in the UK, and he sells gear, including amps. And there's this young guitar player from an up-and-coming band whose name is Peter. And Peter comes to him one day and says, I sort of have, I'm not getting what I want from these fucking amps. And he says, okay, well, what do you want? He says, first of all, I need more sound. The drummer in our band might be the loudest drummer in the history of rock and roll drummers, and the guitars need to be as big as the drums, and the amps aren't letting that happen. I need more power. I need more volume. And then he said, they're also too clean. Amplifiers and guitars have been honed, focused on getting a clean, accurate, pure sound. We're a hardcore rock and punch in the face rock band. We want it to be gritty. We want it to sound like a locomotive. And we want it to, and so Peter was trying to amp up these amps to be really loud. And one day he jammed I don't know if it was a knife or a stick or something through the speaker so that it would reverberate even more and have a crunchy, grittier sound. And he said, this is what I'm looking for. I need this sound and I need it to be loud. And Jim's like, well, yeah, I don't know of anybody who makes that. We don't have any amps like that. The brands we sell don't do that. And he says to him, well, Jim, you need to make me this amp. You know everything there is about amps. Jim Marshall was not in the amp business. He was in the selling musical equipment business. So finally he said, okay, Peter, I'm going to try and build you what you want and see if we can get there together. And that was the birth of what ultimately became known in the music business as the Marshall Stack. And if you've ever been to see any kind of heavy duty rock and roll band, hard rock band, you see a wall of Marshalls. And when you walk into a club or you walk into a show and you see a whole bunch of Marshalls, you know you're about to see rock and fucking roll.
It's been a while since I've walked into a club, to be honest with you. But I get it.
Turns out that young man, Peter, was Pete Townsend. And that band was called The Who. And that drummer was Keith Moon. And Jim Marshall listened. And that one insight from that one super consumer who was on the far edge of the bell curve, we can talk about this in a second, who was demanding something, and this is a very important word, different, breakthrough, exponential, weird, unconventional, set the path for hard rock music and rock and roll music going forward. And Jim listened. And so we all want to be listening for the weird, listening for the different, listening for the customer who is pushing and pulling and morphing and breaking open and pulling apart the product and trying to get it to do things that maybe it was not intended to do, because this customer sees a missing, has a problem. And in the case of a super consumer, a guy like this, who was the leader of an up-and-coming rock band, who this was his whole life, he was looking for this sound. That's called a super consumer. It's not the casual user. So there's a lot here that we can unpack, but this is the big insight. Listen to the super who is pushing the boundaries and is searching for different, because in there is gold.
Yeah, I love that. That was specific to product improvement or product creation insight, but there's also listening to super consumers, like not necessarily tied to the product, which I find fascinating because there's so much you can do with that. related to content, marketing related work. I love that example. And I've also had founders on the show talk about how surprise and delight kind of has to do with this, right? Like somebody mentioned that the best customers are not the ones that are happy with the product. The best customers are actually the ones that are using it and are pissed and they're not happy, right?
And they'll tell you what doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. So this resonates. I wanted to just mention that you have a course called How to Discover Your Superpower, Become a Creator Capitalist, and Thrive in an AI World. Did you want to talk about this for a second? I know we're at time. This always happens when I bring you on. Like, I have way more that I want to talk to you about, but
we can talk about that maybe a different time. It's a very important thing that we're doing in our work, but it's a whole other conversation. I did want to make sure with this conversation, we can do that now or some other time, you tell me. But with this part of it, there's a fundamental data science insight as pioneered by Eddie Yoon that we must discuss, which is the following. Most people, when they're taught to analyze data, there's a data analysis and gathering component that happens and understanding and representing and all that stuff. So we gather the data, whether it's through surveys, whether it's through actual user usage information or interactions of any kind, mining interactions with AI, whatever it is, feedback from sales reps, feedback from product, et cetera, et cetera. Data and information about customers and what they're doing with our products comes in kind of hard and measurable ways and soft ways that we can, et cetera, et cetera. So as we look at how we analyze that data, here's how most people are taught to analyze data. They're taught to look for averages and medians. And so if you think about a bell curve, how satisfied are our customers? How much does this set of features matter? How much does this part of the experience matter? How much, et cetera, et cetera. They look at the bell curve, and what almost everybody does is they go to the middle of the bell curve because that's where the most customers are. That's not where category designers go. They go to the edges. They look for the weird because a super consumer, by definition, is in the top 8 to 10%, not just of your customers, but are the buyers in your market category, some of whom are your customers and many of whom will not be your customers. Look for the supers. I'll give you a simple example. Eddie did a whole bunch of work to help iRobot grow in the very beginning, the robot vacuums. And he did a set of category science research for them, focused on supers. And they found there's some very small percentage that were buying 4, 5, 6, 8 of these things. Nobody looked at that data. They'd all focused on the fat part of the bell curve, not on the far right of the bell curve. And so Eddie did this analysis. And he said, okay, what the hell's going on here? Let's go find out. So they did surveys and interviews and the like. They listened to them. The supers on the far edges, most people buy 1. Why are these people buying 8? How big's your house? Well, here's what they found. Gifting. It turns out when, particularly as the category was new, but I believe it to be true today, best of my understanding, that when somebody purchased an iRobot and they realized, well, I wash myself every day. I clean myself. Why wouldn't I clean my house every day? And they were people who wanted to clean their house every day. And the robot does that. Once they had that aha and the experience and they fell in love with the tech and they fell in love with the product and they saw how miraculous this thing was that it could vacuum their house for them all day, every day, their immediate feeling after the wonder and excitement and satisfaction and awesomeness of that was, you know what? I got to give this to my mom. I got to give this to my brother, my sister, my loved ones. And even though they were very high-end, high-priced consumer product, new category at the time, people said, you'll forgive me for forgetting what the prices were at the time, but maybe they were $500 or $800 or whatever they were. It was not sending somebody a candy bar, but they were so passionate about the breakthrough of this stuff and the value of it for them in their lives, people who like their house to be clean and know that their friend, sister, mother, brother, uncle feels the same way, they were compelled to buy them for them as gifts. So what did iRobot do? They created a gifting program. They evangelized the joy of gifting them And they created various incentives to encourage the gifting of their product. Well, what do we all know, Anna? Word of mouth, WOM, is, was, and always will be the greatest form of marketing.
The greatest.
And the greatest WOM you can have is somebody loves what you do so much, they gift it to another person they love. Well, guess what? By focusing on that incredibly small number, single-digit percentage of their customers who are driving a massive amount of their revenue and profit and growth and category growth as well. They were WOMing the category into existence, not just driving product and revenue and profit for iRobot. They were expanding the fucking market through gifting. Well, once iRobot understood that and built programs and approaches for enabling that and supporting that and loving the super consumers who were driving the WOM through the gifting, the growth went through an exponential uptick, right? Exponential change. And so I share that because when looking at customer feedback of any kind, customer data of any kind, customer insight of any time, the vast majority of people go to the fat part of the bell curve. What are most customers saying most of the time about most things? And I'm not saying there isn't value there. There is value there. But what they ignore is what the hell's going on with the top 3% on the far right end of that bell curve. Why are these people buying 8x more of our shit than anyone else?
I think this is critical. Like the most important part of our episode is understanding that this is the work that is not happening across the board. And we're not picking the right people to talk to, first of all, right? Like when we say we're doing customer research and talking to customers, we're just talking to everybody. We're talking to customers. We're talking to prospects. We're talking to everyone. And then all of that research gets meshed together. And there's no unique insight you're going to find. So we don't know who to talk to. That's problem number one. And then the insights we get are like all over the place. Like, who do we listen to? So this is the key.
Listen
here.
to the supers.
Yeah. Listen to the supers and find what's weird. And I love that.
And there's one other thing I want to share here that is a massive growth unlock.
What is it?
So Eddie Yoon, after years of research and analytics and primary research and publishing, discovered a follow-on insight to the one I just shared, which is a super of 1 is a super of 9. That is to say, if you think about yourself, you're probably a super of something. And if you're a super of something, you're probably a super of a handful of other things in adjacent categories. So for example, Eddie grew up in the S&P 500 B2C world primarily. So here's a fun example I really like, and then I'll tie it back to software. So he says to me, "How do you take your coffee, Chris?" I said, "I like it black. I like coffee in my coffee." And he said, "You like to drink alcohol?" Which I do. I think it's a very important thing in life. And he said, "Let me guess what your favorite drink is. Is it whiskey?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "Let me guess what your favorite wine is. Do you like wine?" I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "It's probably very big reds." I said, "You're right. As a matter of fact, I pretty much only want to drink Northern Italian reds for that reason." And he said, "Well, the reason I know that is because if you're attracted to those strong tastes in a coffee, then you probably are the same in a liquor and in a wine. A super of 1 is a super of 9. And once you understand that, it opens up all kinds of interesting opportunities. For example, a coffee maker could launch a bourbon-flavored coffee or do joint marketing with a bourbon company.
I was going to say partnerships. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because if you're a whiskey maker and you're a coffee maker, there's an overlap there. And I say this in air quotes with a big smile, steal each other's customers to drive growth. So now let's think about that as a software startup or a technology startup. One of the things in category design we should probably talk more about are adjacencies. Kevin Maney, co-author of Play Bigger, has talked about what he calls the adjacent possible. And so if you think about whatever your product does, and most importantly, the problem it solves and who it solves it for. Well, one question that marketers doing research around customers hardly ever ask is, what are adjacent or related tech products that you use in and around or near our stuff? Because our stuff doesn't live in a vacuum for a customer. You sell an application, you sell a piece of infrastructure, you sell whatever it is you sell, and it fits in some kind of an environment, be it a deep technical environment, if you're deep in the data center, or user-facing applications, or what have you, right? Nothing stands alone. It's part of something, right? Canva is deeply connected to PowerPoint for obvious reasons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you begin to understand what are the adjacencies and where you fit for a super, that is to say, if they're a super of your shit, what else are they a super of? Well, that might unlock all kinds of insights, new product strategy insights, new marketing partnership insights, new integration approaches. It may change completely the way you think about your channel strategy, how you build your overall ecosystem, who's in that ecosystem, whose ecosystem you want to be in, etc. And so once you understand A, supers, and B, that a super of 1 is a super of 9, and your product doesn't live in a vacuum for people, it's part of a life experience for them, that opens up massive new vistas of growth. And this simple, powerful, market customer-facing insight is one of the most radically underused, easy to execute, easy to access growth strategies in a history of technology. And most startup founders and most startup marketers don't know about it, don't think about it, and certainly don't do the work to figure out everything we've just talked about vis-a-vis finding the supers and the weird, understanding that deeply, and then going the next step, a super of 1 is a super of 9.
Yeah. You just mentioned life experience. I mean, that's really the goal with research. It's not just, what do you like about our product? Why did you decide to get our product? It's asking questions around their life experience, which comes back to this whole person customer research, which I love that you just said that, right? It's not just your product. It's then what do they do as part of their day-to-day? How does that then incorporate into other tech tools that they're using? And that's all things that you can find out. It's easy, but it's not being done. So, Christopher, you added a lot more stuff that I didn't have in my Google Doc, and I am thankful for that, because I think the stuff that we talked about was way more important and frankly, provides so much deep learning for where to focus time. I know that there's a lot of mistakes that are being done and companies that struggle.
Radical amounts of time and money being literally lit on fire. Go talk to your supers.
Go talk to your
Go
supers.
find your Pete Townsend. Go figure out, if you're coffee, go figure out what your bourbon and red wine is.
And never feel like you've gotten plenty of customer signal already because you did it before you launched your product. This is ongoing. Things change. Political climate changes, economy changes, the work that your supers are doing changes, different products coming into the market, competition changes. This is an ongoing thing. So yes, talk to your supers, be obsessed with them. Don't just say it, actually do it. Christopher, you're wonderful. Thank you for joining me. And if anybody wants to find Christopher, he is currently on LinkedIn. We will find out if that stays. Christopher Lochhead, and Category Pirates, if you want to learn more about all the cool things that Christopher is doing and building for folks like myself with a different mind, please go to categorypirates.com. Christopher, as always, it has been a pleasure. Thank you for joining me for the 4th time.
Thank you, Anna. I want you to know I love what you do. It's incredibly important. I love the way you do it. I think you make a huge contribution by creating this platform and all the things that you do. And I absolutely adore you and love being part of your world.
I appreciate that so much, Christopher. Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of Building with Buyers. New episodes drop weekly, so make sure you're following wherever you get your podcasts. You can find me on LinkedIn, Anna Furmanov. Visit my website to learn more about how to turn customer insights into positioning and messaging your buyers will understand. FurmanoffMarketing.com. And don't forget to leave a review if you're loving the show.